Mount Sinai is one of the most popular mountains in the world. While it doesn't claim to be the tallest, the mountain is of great significance to some of the major religions of the world: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. But as much as Mount Sinai attracts tourists, it also attracts skeptics and scientists that have made shocking discoveries. In this video, we bring you the shocking discoveries that scientists have made on Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is famous for hosting the nation of Israel on their trek out of slavery in Egypt. However, the exact location of Mount Sinai today continues to be hotly debated, as multiple sites have been suggested by different scholars. Even scientists have weighed in on the subject, and with differing opinions, of course. When have scientists ever agreed on a subject? The most popular location of Mount Sinai today is a massive granite peak in the south-central region of the Sinai Peninsula between Israel and Egypt that rises to 2,285 meters above sea level. In comparison, Mount Everest is 8,850 meters tall. Even though scholars disagree on the exact route the Israelites took during their exodus from Egypt, this location has long been accepted as the actual site by many scholars of the major faith traditions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Pilgrims, scholars, and hermits have frequented this site for thousands of years, with the earliest recorded visits by Eusebius of Caesarea during the 4th century AD and Egeria's pilgrimage during her 381 to 384 AD travels in the region. The region was frequently visited by mystics and pilgrims seeking spiritual enlightenment during the early Messianic Christian era, possibly including Paul the Apostle. The famous monastery of St. Catherine was built at the foot of the mountain in 530 AD. This is possibly the world's oldest continuously inhabited Christian monastery, maintained by the Orthodox Church of Mount Sinai, and contains a library of ancient manuscripts, including a 4th century Greek Codex Sinaiticus of the Bible. Meanwhile, you might be shocked to learn that the view of Mount Sinai's location in Judaism is not so strong. According to rabbinic teaching, Mount Sinai's actual location does not hold a prominent place in Jewish traditions because the mountain itself was not inherently important or holy, but rather God who inhabited the mountain during the law's giving. In other words, Mount Sinai was made holy by the events that occurred there, but once the Torah was given and the covenant was established, Mount Sinai became just another mountain. But that has not stopped people from speculating. Other researchers promote another location as the possible site of Mount Sinai, and you would be surprised to learn where this location is: Saudi Arabia, the founding place of the Islamic faith. Saudi Arabia corresponds to the land of Midian, and prominent scholar Charles Beck suggested Mount Bagir to the northeast of the Gulf of Aqaba. However, Alois Musil and H. Philby point to Jebel al-Manifa near Wadi al-Harab, while French scholar Jean Koenig proposes the volcanic peak of Halal Beda. However, there is the by far more controversial theory by the late Ron Wyatt that Mount Sinai was located in a place called Jebel al-Lawz. Interestingly, this American scholar had a knack for finding biblical locations. He claimed to have found Noah's Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Red Sea crossing, the Ark of the Covenant, and other biblical archaeological treasures. Wyatt's theory that Mount Sinai is in the ancient land of Midian is based on his interpretation of Exodus 3:1. He reasoned that because Moses looked after Jethro's flocks, the mountain of God that Moses encountered had to be in Midian as well. Jethro was conveniently a Midian priest. Wyatt concluded that the real Mount Sinai must be located east of the path of the miraculous Red Sea crossing in the territory of western modern-day Saudi Arabia, after claiming to have discovered it in 1978 at Nuwaba in the Gulf of Aqaba, the eastern branch of the Red Sea. The best theory, according to Wyatt, was Jebel al-Lawz, which boasted the highest peak in the entire western Saudi Arabian mountain range. Wyatt and his two sons boldly and illegally crossed into Saudi Arabia in 1984 to explore and photograph the area, but they were apprehended, their films confiscated, and they were imprisoned for 78 days as Israeli spies by the Saudis. Wyatt later returned to Saudi Arabia, this time illegally, on a treasure-hunting mission, looking for the Mountain of God as well as Egyptian treasures in the region and remnants of Pharaoh's massive army, which he believed could be found at the bottom of the Red Sea. Following delegations, researchers produced impressive results in the following years, but most scholars agree that these are still speculative and lack definitive and indisputable archaeological proofs. Wyatt's research concludes the famous mountain is a large pile of granite rocks about a quarter mile from the mountain's base that bears petroglyphs of bovine, that is, bulls, cows, and oxen. Wyatt claimed that this was the great altar of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, and possibly the one mentioned in the Golden Calf story, after quoting a Saudi archaeologist from Riyadh University who said that these were Egyptian-style cows and bulls that had never been found anywhere else in Saudi Arabia. But there is more powerful evidence in support of Mount Sinai being located in Saudi Arabia, and the clue once again comes from the Bible itself. According to Deuteronomy 9:21, there was a brook that descended from the mountain into which Moses scattered the ashes of the golden calf that he burned after descending from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments tablets, while the markings of a large water flow snaking down the mountainside appear to start from nowhere, which would suggest a supernatural intervention. They claim that this ancient watershed, which is filled with large water-polished boulders, is clear evidence of a fast-moving, strong stream that carved its path down the mountainside after emerging from a rock. This was the miracle they had been looking for in an arid landscape, and when they came across a large rock that appeared to be split apart in the middle, they speculated that it could be the rock that Moses struck to bring water to the thirsty nation and for which he was prevented from stepping into the Promised Land. But could this be enough evidence to support the claim that this is the real Mount Sinai? Many scholars argue that photographs alone are insufficient evidence to establish the case, and that a team of geologists must closely examine the rock to verify the researchers' claim. Furthermore, they point to the fact that while the region is classified as an arid desert, it receives approximately 100 millimeters or 4 inches of rain per year, and heavy rains, mostly in the form of tropical monsoons, frequently create flash floods large enough to have polished these rocks. A third possible site of Mount Sinai is located in the Negev Desert in Israel between Petra and Kadesh Barnea. The scholars spearheading this research, dubbed Har Karkom in Hebrew or Mountain of Saffron, base their case on the premise that the ancient Israelites crossed the Sinai Peninsula towards Petra in a fairly straight line, leading them to Har Karkom, the Negev mountain they claim is the biblical Mount Sinai. Excavating and researching teams discovered evidence of rich religious activities all over the large surrounding plateaus, including shrines, altars, stone circles, stone pillars, and over 40,000 rock engravings. Based on these and other local findings, the Israeli researchers propose that Har Karkom is the biblical Mount Sinai, despite the fact that the peak of the discovered religious activity at the site predates the exodus from Egypt, which is traditionally dated between 1600 and 1200 BC. To compensate for the time lag, the Israeli researchers dated the exodus from Egypt between 2350 and 2000 BC, citing other archaeological evidence to back up their theory. Although such revisionist chronologies are not new, they are frequently rejected in scholarly circles. One early denial of the Har Karkom claim contends that the type of early Bronze Age religious items and structures discovered at the site have been discovered in significant numbers in other locations in the Negev and Sinai regions, proving they're not unique to this site. But why exactly is Mount Sinai so important to Christians? The answer is simple: because it was the scene of many shocking events relating to the Israelites. According to biblical accounts, after fleeing Egypt, the Israelites arrived in the Sinai desert. God spoke to Moses from the mountain, telling him that he would appear to the people in the form of a cloud. The long-awaited day arrived after the Israelites had made their preparations. God summoned Moses to the mountain but told him that the people were not permitted to ascend and that the location should be designated as holy. Anybody flouting the rule was instantly executed. Then God spoke and gave the 10 Commandments and other instructions. Moses descended the mountain after God spoke and repeated the Lord's commands. The Israelites promised to obey the Lord. God spoke to Moses on the 7th day. He told him to go inside the cloud, and he did so for 40 days and 40 nights. God gave Moses instructions on how to construct the tabernacle, which included the Ark of the Covenant. He also specified the priest's garments and consecration. Meanwhile, the Israelites became impatient at the foot of the mountain while Moses was communing with God. They proceeded to manufacture a golden calf and began worshipping it, a great act of disobedience. God became enraged and threatened the people with a disaster. However, Moses begged God to have mercy on them, and God agreed. As Moses descended the mountain, he witnessed the Israelites worshipping the golden calf. His own anger got the better part of him, and he became enraged and threw the 2 tablets to the ground, shattering them into pieces. He would return to Mount Sinai and present the Lord with 2 more tablets. He returned for 40 days and 40 nights to write the 10 Commandments on the tablets. This time the Israelites were patient after learning their lesson. He returned to the Israelites with the commandments, which formed the basis of the Israelites' judicial framework for thousands of years after. And meanwhile, even more controversial than the current location of Mount Sinai is the location where the Israelites crossed the Red Sea on their epic escape from the clutches of the Egyptians. There have been several theories paraded by researchers, but one of the most popular is the one by the Doubting Thomas Research Foundation, which puts the crossing at the Gulf of Aqaba. According to the Bible, when the Israelites realized they were trapped between the soldiers and the sea, Moses prayed to God to part the waters, allowing them to pass safely. The waves then crashed back over the Egyptians, who tried to follow, smashing their chariots and drowning the army in the Red Sea. The documentary Finding the Mountain of Moses, the Real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia features researchers led by security analyst Ryan Mauro, who detail their findings. It also comes after scientists believe radiocarbon dating proves the Red Sea parted for Moses. The findings of Mauro and his team come after they claimed that the peak Jabal al-Lawz in the Middle Eastern Kingdom is actually Mount Sinai. According to the findings, the Israelites crossed from the beach of Nuweiba into modern Saudi Arabia. The crossing would only be 8 miles wide, making it easily walkable for fleeing Israelis. The location appears to be consistent with the scholars' theory about Mount Sinai, which is only 75 miles from where they would have arrived after crossing the Red Sea. Experts from the Doubting Thomas Research Foundation cite Dr. Glenn Fritz's research on the Nuweiba crossing. The geography of the 5-mile-long beach, surrounded on both sides by mountains, appears to correspond to the biblical story. It would have provided enough room for the estimated 3 million Israelis who fled Egypt. The Nuweiba land bridge was also discovered, which appears to be a natural formation at a depth of around 33 meters that the Israelites could walk across. And most intriguingly, scholars believe that unusual coral formations resemble chariots that would have sunk when the Red Sea crashed over the Pharaoh. The researchers attempted to dive into the site to investigate, but were turned away by Saudi police. Bible scholars believe evidence near Jabal al-Lawz suggests it was once an Israelite camp, with cave paintings of cows adding to the story of the golden calf. Sadly, the site may soon be destroyed because it's within the footprint of the proposed Saudi megacity Neom, which will be 33 times larger than New York. But that is not all. Scholars are also divided as to whether the Great Exodus from Egypt ever happened at all, and the timing of the Great Exodus of Israel from Egypt, with the different camps choosing dates separated by as much as 200 years. In fact, the argument on timing often overshadows arguments on whether the Exodus took place at all. Some scholars say the Exodus took place in the 13th century BC, meaning it corresponded to the Ramesside period or the Egyptian 19th dynasty. To start with, the names of 3 locations mentioned in the biblical account of Israel's exodus from Egypt correspond to Ramesside period Egyptian place names between the 13th and 11th centuries BCE. According to the Bible, the Israelites were forced to build the store cities of Pithom and Ramses as slaves. The Israelites left Egypt after the 10 plagues and famously crossed the Yam Suf, translated Red Sea or Reed Sea, whose waters were miraculously parted for them. Pithom, Ramses, and Yam Suf are biblical names that correspond to the Egyptian place names Pi-Ramesses, Pi-Atam, and Par-Tiuf. Only from the Ramesside period did these 3 place names appear together in Egyptian texts. The name Pi-Ramesses fell out of use by the start of Egypt's 3rd Intermediate period, around 1085 BCE, and did not reappear until much later. A worker's house in western Thebes also supports a 13th century exodus. Archaeologists from the University of Chicago investigated the mortuary temple of Aya and Horemheb, Egypt's last 2 pharaohs of the 18th dynasty in western Thebes in the 1930s. Aya built the temple in the 14th century BCE, but when Horemheb became pharaoh, he usurped and expanded it. He ruled from the late 14th to the early 13th centuries BCE. Horemheb chiseled out every instance of Aya's name and replaced it with his own. Petty, but that was the way of the pharaohs. Eventually, though, the temple of Aya and Horemheb was later demolished during the reign of Ramses IV in the 12th century BCE. The University of Chicago researchers discovered a house and a portion of another house belonging to the workers tasked with demolishing the temple during their excavations. The overall layout of the house is similar to that of the four-room house typical of Israelite dwellings during the Iron Age. Unlike the Israelite models, which were typically made of stone, the Theban house was made of wattle and daub. It is significant that this house was built in Egypt while the Israelites were building four-room houses in Canaan. Because of the similarities, some speculate that the builders of the Theban house were either Proto-Israelites or a group closely related to the Israelites. The Onomasticon Amenope is another piece of evidence for the Exodus. The Onomasticon Amenope is a categorized list of Egyptian words from the Third Intermediate Period. The papyrus written in hieratic includes the Semitic place name Brkt, which refers to the Pithom Lakes. The Semitic name for the lakes of Pithom was used instead of the Egyptian name in Egyptian sources. It's possible that a Semitic-speaking population lived in the area long enough for their name to supplant the original. Another independent evidence of the Exodus has been claimed by Hans Gudecker, a world-famous Egyptologist. He claimed to have found the evidence in Egyptian writings. This hieroglyphic text, known as the Great Speos Artemidos inscription and dated to the 15th century BCE, is a royal announcement of the achievements of the famous female pharaoh Hatshepsut. According to Gudecker, the pharaoh of the Exodus was a woman. In this text, Hatshepsut states that she has finally dealt with some immigrants or shemale who disregarded the tasks assigned to them. Gudecker claims that these newcomers are Israelites. The earth swallowed their footsteps, according to Hatshepsut. Gudecker says this text refers to the watery destruction of their footsteps, that is, they were drowned. In short, in the Egyptian version, the Egyptians triumph, their opponents, the Israelites, drown. And this substitution of the truth is not surprising for a climate where rulers simply stole the achievements of their late predecessors. And the biblical text itself contains another compelling piece of evidence for the Exodus. Although the evidence is not exactly scientific, a history of enslavement is most likely true. The Exodus storyline of a people fleeing humiliating slavery suggests historically credible elements. Typically, only stories of glory and victory are passed down from generation to generation. A history of slavery is likely to contain elements of truth. As the great Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yadin once said, "What nation would invent such a crazy story, that they were slaves in Egypt and that they left that country and came to this country, and then make that the kernel of all their history? Even if you want to minimize it, there is a core of truth there." Do you think the Great Exodus was real? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments section below.